Hello, everyone. On this episode, we talked to Bill Lewis with 3C, who helps to demystify the payment card industry. Hope you enjoy. My name is Lester Mascon, and this is Parker X, and today we're joined by Bill Lewis and Pieter Sprinkhiuzen. Welcome to the show, guys.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Good morning.
Absolutely. So today we invited Bill onto the show because I think there's a lot of us in the industry that don't really understand fully what the transactional flow and what it looks like for the card payment industry, EMV to PCI to P2PE, and what that transactional flow looks like. And Bill works for 3C, so he has intimate knowledge of how all this stuff works and spends the most of his time actually educating people on what it is, why they need it, what the different certifications mean, and how that goes. So, Bill, why don't you educate us?
Yeah, certainly. First and foremost, the first thought I had when you asked me to come on here is, what a creative idea, something different other than just passing documentation, maybe doing a short video clip, but what a cool idea. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem. I think the idea is to provide value to our industry in a different way.
Yeah.
So
coincidentally, because I was thinking about this the past few days, I'm listening to a podcast on the creative cycle by Freakonomics. And the one I listened to on the way in today is it's not just having a good idea, but it's executing that idea that really, can bring in a good thing to fruition. So I'm living it right now. That's what I wanted to start out by sharing.
Yeah, appreciate that.
So to go into what we do and the wide world of card processing, I think you nailed it when you use the word educate. In my opinion, and I think the market's opinion, because it's been well received, is the key is to educate people and empower them. Not to tell them it's magic. It all happens behind in a closed off room somewhere, is to tell them actually how it works, so that they can understand the full process and not just think that you're coming in to charge them for something they don't understand.
And people don't realize what it is.
Right.
It simply needs to work. That's what they think, and they don't grasp what is happening on the background, right? On the back end.
Exactly. So I've spent a lot of time breaking it down to the basics of credit card processing. Okay, so there's credit card processing is a two-step process. First is authorization. It happens in real time, as long as you do have connectivity. But a payment application will send a request to a gateway. That's where 3C Payment comes in. We are a payment service provider and gateway provider on the back of many parking applications. That's one of our specialized markets.
Does 3C parking mostly play in the unattended space, or is it? Or
that historically, at least in North America, that's been our bread and butter. That's our strong suit.
Okay.
Other places in the world, and we are building up some other business in other verticals such as hospitality, hotel, restaurant, quick service.
It's amazing the difference between attended and unattended payments. I mean, it's completely different worlds, it seems.
Yeah, it's different process flows, it's different certifications, it's different flags that we send with transactions. As any merchant or one of our customers will know, there's different pricing sometimes that comes along with it, a card present versus a card not present transaction. As you guys know, there's different rules put out by the card schemes on an unattended transaction versus an attended transaction, such as CVM, cardholder verification method, needing a PIN, needing a signature, not needing anything because it's unattended. So there are a lot of rules and differences between the business. So going back to the credit card process, what I always try to break it down to people is the first step is authorization. It happens in real time. An application will send a request to a PSP like us or a gateway. We then connect to the merchant's processor, who then goes to Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover, whatever type the card is. If it's a Visa or MasterCard, it will then go to the issuer for authorization. So for me, it'd be like Chase Bank.
So kind of break down processor for a minute. I mean, I think everyone thinks they know what it is, but I mean, who is that, and what exactly is that service they're providing?
Yeah, good question, because there's a lot of different words: processor,
Sure.
Merchant service provider,
clearinghouse,
acquirer. So yeah, there's a lot of different words. So a processor to me is a company that provides a platform that can actually connect to the card scheme. Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, right? So someone has to have access to those networks in order to process a transaction. Now I make I distinguish between a processor and a merchant service provider. Between a processor is actually a company that has one of those platforms. A merchant service provider is somebody that can resell access to one of those platforms. So the big processors being First Data, TSYS, Heartland, Chase Payment Tech. They can sell direct to customers for processing, but they also have an army of resellers in banks, in ISOs.
So, like, what's a popular reseller of one of those platforms?
I mean, Bank of America resells
Okay.
First Data. Obviously
Okay.
they're a huge company, but they have a merchant services division that, will help any client set up credit card processing, and then they'll board them on a First Data platform. So in my, to give it in that example, Bank of America would be the merchant service provider, First Data would be the processor, but any customer or merchant would set up a merchant account with Bank of America, right?
Okay.
And that's who they contract with. And then that's who a gateway like 3C will get in contact with to build the connection to that processing platform in First Data.
Gets more complicated, doesn't it?
It can be a complicated ecosystem. Like I said, it is nice to have a platform like this to talk about it, but we also have plenty of documentation that will show
How it all works.
So generally what I like to do, and I just did this with one of our mutual customers this past week, is you have a discussion about it, and then you send them the backup documentation, or you look at it at the same time to actually follow the process flow.
So once it gets to like Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover, whoever it is, but that's not who issued my card. My card's issued by
Right.
like
So
whoever, right?
Amex and Discover issue their own cards.
Okay.
So they're the be-all, end-all when you're using one of those cards to say, authorize or decline. Bill has the money, Bill has the credit, or he doesn't have the credit.
Sure.
Now, in my example, I have a Visa card with Chase Bank. So if it's a Visa card, it goes from Visa, routes to Chase. Chase makes the decision, Bill's good for the parking charge, or Bill isn't good for the parking charge. And then that authorization response, yes or no, gets sent right back through the system to that payment gateway, and then we send the okay to the payment application to decide what to do with it. So you decide to raise the gate or not, or approve the transaction on a pay on foot.
It's a lot of different companies. Does that mean everyone's kind of clipping the ticket along the way?
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone's a different value-added
Sure.
service. I mean, that's a good question to bring up, because that's one of the first questions. Someone that maybe hasn't been in parking for a long time or has never set up a credit card processing system before, the first question they'll say is, well, why can't we connect directly to the bank or to the processor? And, the answer to me is pretty simple, is that there's a lot of cost, certification, specialization, compliance that comes along with these different parts. And
Isn't 3C assuming risk as well?
Yeah, we are, but one of our key foundational pieces of our business is compliance with the payment card industry data security standards, PCI DSS. I mean, that piece is something that we live every day. We go through audits and for various certifications that we do have. You'll hear a lot of acronyms: PCI, PADSS, P2P. PCI, PTS.
So kind of take us through the differences and what those are.
Sure. Well, it all depends on what you're actually doing with cardholder data.
Okay.
So, I don't claim to be an expert, but as I think I said to you yesterday, I know enough to be dangerous. We do have a
Sure.
security and an IT team that manages for our company, and whenever the questions get a bit rough, or they want more in depth, that's where I bring in the big guns. So we do have access to people like that as well, that actually work with the PCI Council and work with our auditors. But I mean, PCI DSS is going to cover anybody that's transmitting or storing card details and payment data. So we are a level 1 PCI DSS provider. It comes with the territory. We have to do that to do our business. PADSS is a payment application data security standards, so that covers any application that's actually creating or managing transactions. If your application is seeing credit card data, you're going to want a PADSS validation.
Okay.
We have that as well for our application that sits on various systems.
How does
we work with.
P2PE different from that?
Sure. So P2PE, point-to-point encryption, is a relatively new validation compared to those old ones.
Because people talk about EMV, chip and pin, and P2PE kind of all in the same, like they're like interchangeable, right? Like they're all the same thing.
But the key there is that P2P is completely separate and independent from EMV.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to start with EMV actually. EMV is a method of how a transaction works, how a card is read. So EMV is like the next step from the mag swipe, right? So the data was and still is stored on the mag swipe. It used to just pass that data to any application to then process the transaction. An EMV standard is the same idea, only now it's embedded on a chip. And that chip allows the application to be a bit smarter. I mean, to put it plainly. So they can do between the chip and the payment application, they can do various checks. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm an unattended application, and then the chip knows, okay, I don't require a PIN or signature because you're an unattended application. So they can run various checks to, I don't want to say heighten the security, but to give more value and structure to the actual transaction. Instead of just pushing data, now they can be talking back and forth to make a smarter transaction. Other checks can be put in place as well.
So EMV and the term chip and PIN are kind of interchangeable.
Well, EMV is really the standard for what needs to be passed and how. Chip and PIN is going to be what I consider
chip and signature.
Yeah,
chip
I consider
and
more of
PIN.
a marking term because it's reading the chip and then it's requesting a verification method. So entering a PIN or signing your name is considered a verification method.
And that chip is the same whether you insert or tap.
Well, it still reads the same data.
Okay.
Off the card. It doesn't read it from the chip. There's actually an antenna built within the chip that it reads for contactless transactions.
Okay.
Yeah. So EMV once again is the method or the standard in which the transaction takes place. So how the data is passed. A lot of people think it is brings a higher level of security. It does in the sense that it's very hard right now to duplicate one of those chips. The story
you can't necessarily put a skimmer on a device and do it that
I mean,
way.
it is easy these days to duplicate a magnetic stripe.
Sure.
So there's the story that goes back a couple years that some smart engineer at MIT can duplicate the chip, but the standard fraudster that's out there just trying to cop card numbers and print them on cards can no longer do that with chips. So that being said, this only applies in card-present scenarios when the card is actually there. So in theory, if someone has a stolen card number, prints it on the back of a mag swipe, and then goes and tries to use it, the terminal should be smart enough to realize, well, this is a chip card, and it'll say, please insert the chip. If there's no chip on the card, it won't allow it to proceed.
And from the perspective of security, how would this translate to, for instance, offline batching? Because there are so many checks now to see whether something is valid, but all those checks involve the internet. But offline credit card transactions are required by the market. And from perspective of security, how do you see that?
Well, actually, the chip can store a bit of data on it. So it actually makes it a better solution that, in certain circumstances, the chip can store more data than it would if it was just a swipe needing to go online to validate the card. So the chip can do certain validations in certain circumstances. When it comes to offline, it is quite demanded by the market. But actually, one thing I've realized relatively recently is that some acquirers or some processors don't even allow it. They require online authorization for any card type that's being used, and that's once again for certain processors.
It's definitely a decision you have to make when you're setting up your merchant account. Like you have to actually specifically ask for it to get it, because we've seen that before as well.
Right, and it is new. There's a lot of changes being made.
Is it a more expensive transaction?
In certain circumstances, yes. To think about a good analogy would be card not present versus card present. When you do an online transaction, there's not as much information passed as when you just type in your card number, expiration date, and hit OK on Amazon or whatever site you're using. So there's more information that's being passed when you swipe or insert a card all the way to the acquirer or issuer. So the more information, I liken it to say the less risk involved. So the lower the per transaction fee. That's not on our side. That only comes down to the processor. If you've ever seen a contract that a processor will provide a merchant, there's plenty of different scenarios, card types, corporate cards, debit cards, all different card types that have different rates associated with it, and that the same goes for a card present versus a card not present. So all that being said, in an unattended scenario, the application might not store all of the data. It might not be allowed to store all of the data. that it needs to pass through to the processor to actually authorize once connectivity comes back. So therefore, there could be some downgrades in fees.
While we were at the show, at the Pi show yesterday, I think I had 6 to 7 people approach me about payments. I think that seemed to be like every vendor that would walk up, that was someone that wanted to talk to us about that. There was payments was the most common piece. Everyone wanted to talk about payments. What is it about 3C that why should people work with 3C? Like, what are they doing different?
Well, I hope when they asked you just told them to come to booth 613. Well, I want to go back one. I didn't quite finish the P2P explanation, because that's we talked a little bit about what EMB is. It's the method of taking the transaction. So P2P, point-to-point encryption, is a validation that companies like us do with the PCI Council for our solution. So, reading the chip, once again, independent of P2P, that's just how we read the chip. P2P is a solution that we validate with the PCI Council to show them that we're doing things by their standards. Now, for years, we've been encrypting cards at the point of usage using our terminal solution. Now we had to do a validation to show them that our solution was compliant with their standards. So, in effect, it's always good to make sure that you're checking with the proper authorities to know that you're doing things correctly. But we've been providing this sort of level of security for a long time. Now we just have the stamp, and we're on the list to show that we're validated with the council. So P2P is an encryption validation that, in the end will make sure that a merchant scope can be reduced. And in effect will allow them to have an easier time or less work to do when they're trying to go through their annual compliance audit with their processor. So it's all about benefiting the merchants and reducing their scope and what they need to do to be compliant. It's
a much different sheet of paper to fill out for when you actually go
SAQ.
Through
So the questionnaire or the assessment questionnaire that they must fill out it's drastically reduced in what they have to do. So it results in time and money savings.
So a lot of people, you hear it all the time, if we're using a P2P verified solution, all the transactions are happening that way. It means that like a PCI compliance for a parks manufacturer isn't necessarily necessary anymore. Now you're still in scope, but you're no longer handling, touching, seeing credit card data whatsoever. So you need to make sure all that exists in the system, whatever it is on site. Everything connected to it would be in scope, but there's nothing to actually validate anymore on the park systems or whatever system it is that's connected to the terminal.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm honest when customers ask me that, is that I can't tell you that. I'm not the correct authority. Really, that's their security assessor that can make that call. I don't deal with security assessors, but I know some will say, yep, you're right. If it's a P2P solution, we can prove that the payment application is out of scope. They might have some follow-up questions, but really that's up to their assessor to decide if they want their customer or want to recommend their customer use a PADSS validated solution up front, being the payment application, the parking system. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, in theory, no, it shouldn't require you to, because you're never touching card data. But the be-all, end-all is going to be their security assessor that does their audit for them. Now, in certain circumstances, an application could want card details back for whatever reason, to do recurring transactions, to start mining for data. So just because you're using a P2P solution doesn't mean that you're not passing card data back to the application. We're not. But in certain circumstances, maybe a payment application would want card data back so that they can start creating recurring transactions. That's where solutions like tokenization can come in.
Okay.
Once again, tokenization being separate from EMB, being separate from P2P. Tokenization is basically just when a provider like us, and we do provide the solution. You pass us or somebody passes us card details. We pass back a dummy number. You guys store that dummy number, which is useless to anybody else except for us. And then in our PCI Level 1 validated data center, we store the data for you. Whenever you send us a transaction request with that token, we create a real transaction. So once again, it's all about reducing scope for the merchant and our partners.
Wow.
So
there's a lot to it.
Yeah, there is a lot to it. It's a complicated ecosystem, but I think you hit the nail on the head when you approach the topic of, it's not just everything is the same. These are different solutions. These are different certifications. Whenever we talk to somebody about a new integration or a new partnership, it's, well, what do you guys want to do? Do you want recurring transactions? Do you want encrypted transactions? Most likely, yes. But what's your system going to do? And then we can propose the full solution to back it up.
So you work with a lot of clients. What do you think what's the biggest mistake you see customers making when it comes to credit card transactions in general?
I would say the biggest thing is reconciliation. Making sure that all of the transactions taken on site actually hit your bank account, and not checking, once a month, because then you have a mountain of data to deal with. But I think the best customers check on a daily basis or every couple days to make sure that their reports from Tuesday match their deposits from Thursday. And that's actually one thing that we are very involved with at 3C.
I think I've got those phone calls before where you get the call and said, we haven't had credit card transactions in a month.
Right. So we have certain things in place. Every morning we go through a morning check routine where we make sure every one of our sites uploads to our central system. If it doesn't, we contact the customer and say, did you lose internet connection? Is something going on? Did you unplug a server? Things like that. So we do have some checks in place, but I'm talking about when transactions are going on normally, they're just not monitoring their bank account. They're just seeing the deposits and they're like, cool, we're getting money. But then, an accountant or an auditor might come in a month or 2 months later and say, hey, we're missing a lot of money, or we can't match up why we have so many deposits. And this is, like I said, this is something we're involved in actively as well, because we provide a very comprehensive reporting system to all of our customers at no additional cost to use to run daily, weekly reports. They can see transactions in real time. They have refund functionality that they can do through our site without having full access to card data. But we provide them with all the tools. And I always say that our best customers are the ones that use those and know them better than us sometimes, because they use them every day. Now, if you don't know them better than us and you need some help, we also have a support team that a lot of their time is spent helping with reconciliation questions.
How are you reconciling with the parks? That's something somebody has to do manually, or is there like is it actually pulling that data over and offering you the?
Yeah, so the best practice that we recommend is you have a parks report from yesterday. In our reporting system, you can actually set it to match up to that trend, that what we call it a shift day. So the day that the transactions were taken on site. So if you run a report on our system by shift day, for yesterday,
like batch close,
being Tuesday, the numbers should add up. If they don't, that's where we can look into it a little bit more. But unless there's refunds being made after the fact, or if there's different deposit schedules for different card types. This is all customer based on each individual customers, but those should match up. Now,
do you integrate directly to any other like parks or whatever the system is? Are you actually pulling the data down from them for what they say the credit cards were that day, and then doing any comparison there?
Well, no, because they're sending us every individual transaction request that then gets sent, recorded to our database, and then we use that to pass to the customer via our reporting system. So the best practice once is step one: make sure your park system matches up with our shift date. Then separately, we have to process the transactions to their processor to actually, be deposited in their bank account. Okay. And then we have another report that you can set to match up to your processor. And we call that an invoice date, when we actually post those to be invoiced. Because I mentioned earlier that authorization happens in real time, but the settlement of the transaction never happens until the next day, because you have to wait for the full day to close out. So the authorization date and the settlement date aren't going to be the same. That's why we've set up our reports where you can match it to the front end with the park system, and then also with a different setting on the back end to your deposit. So it's almost two-step process as well. Make sure that it matches up first with your park system, and then make sure it matches up with your deposit.
Got it.
So that's kind of, as simply put as I can, how we propose reconciliation as a two-step process as well.
What do you think 3C does better, different? What sets you apart from a very busy space?
Yeah. Well, it all goes back, like I said, to education and empowerment. I mean, I think that our proposition is threefold. The first is going to be our technical solution. What we actually do, the bread and butter of it, the where we fit into the ecosystem is that payment gateway between the application and the processor. Once again, somebody has to be there to provide the solution, the technical support of the solution, the certifications that we went through, some of those added functionalities like tokenization, like reporting. Somebody has to be there to do it.
You actually mentioned something the other day too, talking about like actually tracking the chain of custody of the terminals and that sort of thing.
So that goes back to P2PE.
Okay.
Point-to-point encryption is not just.
I don't want to derail you from what you were saying,
okay.
but I just thought it was
actually,
interesting.
it fits into the technical solution
Sure.
we provide. I know I appreciate you bringing it up because part of point-to-point encryption is there are very stringent chain of custody rules. That you have to have an audit of every single P2P terminal from when it left the manufacturer to when it's installed. So we actually have our team tracking that for every terminal. Whenever we ship something out that's P2P, we need confirmation of when it arrives. We ask the people that received it to confirm that they received what they should have from the packing list. All the serial numbers match up. And then we also ask them to confirm whenever they take it from their facility to site because we need a record of all of that. Because if ever one of our customers were to get audited, we need to be able to show that full chain of custody. So we're taking that burden off of our partners and merchants. Sure, we need to ask the questions. Did you receive this?
Sure.
Was it correct? Let us know when you take this to install it, and let us know when you're done installing it. And then obviously we know when the terminals go live because we do the testing with the whoever's doing the implementation. So yeah, that's a good point to bring up, is that there's a very stringent chain of custody that's required per the P2PE.
Sounds
spec.
like some of those things that, if no one's checking, then maybe not a lot of people are doing it, right?
I would agree with that. I mean, I talked to some of our customers. Their assessors are, telling them, yeah, you're using a P2P solution, you're P2P compliant. But I think as time goes on, more and more, they're gonna, nail down a bit more of the specifics that are required per the specification that was put out for P2P. So all of that is rolled into what I consider like our technical solution,
Okay.
the actual services that we provide. The second part of our proposition is our customer service. We have not only a different layers of customer service, but they're specialized in the parking industry because this is what we've been doing. We have straight customer service that deals with reconciliation, that deals with general questions, help with refunding, help with logging into our portal, things like that. But we also have a dedicated onboarding team that just builds our accounts and does our implementations. And then we also have a second level support that we call tech support that has a more in-depth knowledge of maybe the networks, maybe how our systems talk to the park systems. So we have different levels of customer service depending on what somebody's calling in for. And I think that's a huge value add. I think something else we talked about yesterday is value added service organizations, right? So people can say that, you're just another link in the chain. However, we provide an added value service, just like a processor would if there's, a reseller relationship between a bank and a processor. Okay, why can't I go directly to the processor? You can, but they're not going to know parking. They're not going to know your local industry. They're not going to know who you are. That's where I think, when you have a complicated system like credit cards, the more help, the better. So I really think that having a multi-layered support team is a huge benefit to our customers and partners.
I think also too, your solution enabling the offline transaction to occur, because you're not going to get that if you're direct on any level. Like that.
Yeah, unless a park system built it in, which the idea for any parks manufacturer is you guys don't want to deal with credit cards. That's why.
Well, it's turned into something different, right? The terminals it can no longer be a part of the equipment like they used to be. The mag stripe used to just be built in to whatever the encoding device was.
Then it would take all the information and pass it over the network to a server somewhere. Yeah. So the system has changed in the sense that we now are trying to take you out of that process flow.
I think a lot of people that I've talked to just about 3C in general really always go on about the reporting.
Well, that's a great segue, because that brings me to point number 3 is our reporting site, 3cportal.com, which once again we provide to every one of our customers at no additional cost, because we really truly think something like that helps them with their ongoing operations. When you ask me what I thought the biggest problem was, is reconciliation. And the more tools available to the accountants, to the people that are doing that reconciliation, the better. Because you never want someone calling you 3 months down the line and saying, we're missing $2,000 or we have an extra. Well, maybe they wouldn't call us if they have extra, if they have a surplus. But in the end, as we all know, the people at the top want to make sure everything is accounted for. And, we provide the tools and the services to do it. And one of the key things to that is not just giving the reports, but like I mentioned earlier, refund functionality. If you're going directly to a bank, well, how are you going to do a refund? Through our system, you can actually log in, find the transaction by either the last four of the card or the date and time and amount of transaction. And, it's as easy as clicking refund and confirm. No full access to card data, per PCI guidelines. You don't have to call the customer. You can even email them a receipt right from the portal if you want to. So that
really enables like a parking operator to be able to handle some of those complaints right there on the spot.
100%. And another thing that our customers like is we can set up a access in a hierarchy system, whereby we have a customer fill out a contact form where they tell us who has access to this. Because maybe you don't want your person at the site to have refund access. Maybe you want somebody at the corporate office that sits 500 miles away to be able to do that, because they're the one in the end that's responsible for it. Or maybe you do want somebody, maybe you have a local parking manager that you want to have access to that. So we have a lot of flexibility with how we can set up the hierarchies. Speaking of corporate offices, we can also set them up to have access to and see 20 locations underneath them, from the ivory tower, to make sure that they're have an eye on all of their business. They can have the local manager only see their single facility, but a regional manager can see 20 locations.
That's good. So it's got a lot of multi-tenant features built into it as well. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Peter, anything you want to add on that, or?
No. I think the main thing is that the reporting part is super important, and our customers, they don't understand it. They expect payment to work as cheap as possible, right? So what we often see is that the customer needs to be connected to 3C to explain the services that Bill is now explaining to us, because the customer sees it as simple as they think it is. Just
I think a lot of people
paying it. So those three pillars that Bill just described are super important, and it justifies what a company like 3C is doing.
I think a lot of people they only start looking under the hood when they have a problem, which is exactly what Bill was saying. The biggest mistake that he sees is people only really start digging in when there's an issue, and if they were proactive about it and use the reporting, everything available to them, they could avoid situations like that.
But they have the possibility to look under the hood. So all those
true.
tools allow a customer to analyze and to take action, and that brings so much more functionality.
Yeah, like I said, it's about empowering them to, support their business better.
Right, exactly.
And, I like the word you use, pillars. I usually call it the value proposition, but the technical solution, the customer support, and then the reporting functionality is what really, I think, sets us apart and drives our customers forward.
Bill, what's the best way to contact you?
Well, you can always go to the website, 3cpayment.com, but, I'm available for any educational sessions. We can rehash what we talked about here, or we can provide some backup documentation, but usually, my email is bill.lewis@3cpayment.com. I know this isn't a live podcast, but I'll be at the Pie Show at booth 613. We'll go stand around for a few hours and smile and shake hands and explain the wild world of credit card processing to anybody to listen.
Thank you. That's good. Appreciate that. That was very educational.
Yeah, thank you,
Bill.
All right, guys. Have fun. Hey, so thank you very much for listening. If you made it through this far, I really appreciate it. We're very excited to be bringing this to the industry. There's not really anything else like it. Once again, this is Lester Mascon. Name of the podcast is Parker X. Please like it. Please share it. That means the world. Please share it and rate it, and tell us what you think of the show. We're going to try to keep doing a bunch of these, and your comments and feedback is really important. Also, if anyone else would like to be on the show, please drop me a line, and we'll be happy to get something put together. Thanks.